I paid for my daughter's wedding. Her husband raised a toast to humiliate me in front of 300 guests. A toast to my father-in-law, even though he's just a stinking mechanic. At that very moment, my billionaire business partner asked for the microphone, and I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that paying for my daughter's dream wedding would become the most humiliating moment of my life. The ballroom at the Riverside Country Club was everything Camilla had ever wanted. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over 300 guests, white roses adorned every table, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. I had worked 16-hour days for 2 years to afford this moment. Every overtime shift, every skipped meal, every penny saved had led to this night. I stood at the back of the reception hall, watching my 28-year-old daughter dance with her new husband Marcus. She looked radiant in her designer gown, the one that cost more than I made in 3 months. My chest swelled with pride despite the exhaustion weighing down my shoulders. This was worth it, all of it. The grease under my fingernails had been scrubbed raw, my best suit pressed and cleaned, though it still felt shabby compared to the tuxedo surrounding me. Marcus's family moved through the crowd like they belonged here, discussing their vacation homes and investment portfolios. I didn't fit in, but that didn't matter. Tonight was about Camilla's happiness. The clinking of silverware against crystal interrupted my thoughts. Marcus stood at the head table, microphone in hand, his perfectly styled hair gleaming under the lights. The room fell silent as he smiled that charming smile that had won over my daughter 3 years ago. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying easily across the elegant space. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this incredible moment with Camilla and me." A wave of applause rippled through the crowd. I found myself straightening up, expecting maybe a kind word about family coming together, about love conquering all differences. Camilla beamed at her new husband, her eyes shining with adoration. "I want to make a special toast," Marcus continued, raising his champagne glass. His eyes found mine across the room, and something cold flickered in them. "To my new father-in-law, Arthur." My heart stopped. 300 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I felt my cheeks burn as I gave a small, awkward wave. This was it. Maybe Marcus would finally acknowledge how hard I'd worked to make this day possible. Despite being a greasy, smelly mechanic who showed up here tonight stinking of motor oil and embarrassing my beautiful wife, he somehow managed to scrape together enough money to pay for this wedding. The words hit me like a physical blow. Laughter erupted from some of Marcus's friends while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My legs felt weak, my vision blurred. The elegant ballroom suddenly felt like a courtroom where I'd been found guilty of the crime of being working class. I looked desperately toward Camilla, waiting for her to defend me, to tell her husband he'd gone too far. Instead, she stared down at her plate, her cheeks flushed with what looked like shame. My own daughter was embarrassed by me. "So here's to Arthur," Marcus continued, oblivious to or perhaps enjoying my devastation, "for proving that even the most unlikely people can surprise us with their generosity." The applause that followed felt like needles piercing my skin. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the marble floor and never face another human being again. My hands trembled as I gripped the back of a nearby chair, trying to steady myself. 58 years of life, 30 years of marriage to my late wife Sarah, 28 years of raising Camilla as a single father after Sarah's death, and this is what it all amounted to. A public humiliation at my own daughter's wedding. I thought about walking out right then, just turning around and leaving this place where I clearly didn't belong. But something kept me rooted in place. Maybe it was the memory of Sarah making me promise to always take care of our baby girl. Maybe it was the stubborn pride that had carried me through decades of thankless work. As Marcus sat down, basking in the laughter of his friends, I noticed a man at table 12 watching me intently. He was about my age, quietly dressed in a simple dark suit, but something about his presence commanded attention. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't laughing. His expression was serious, almost calculating. Our eyes met for a moment, and he gave me the slightest nod. I didn't know who he was, but in that moment of complete isolation, that small gesture of acknowledgement felt like a lifeline. The reception continued around me, but I felt like I was underwater, watching life happen through a distorted lens. Guests returned to their conversations, the music resumed, and waiters began serving the expensive dinner I'd paid for. Nobody seemed to remember or care about what had just happened, except for the man at table 12. He continued to watch, and something in his steady gaze made me stand a little straighter. I had no idea that in the next few minutes everything would change. As I stood there, humiliated and trembling, my mind drifted back to a time when my life held so much promise. 35 years ago, I wasn't just Arthur the mechanic. I was Arthur Henderson, mechanical engineering graduate from State University, top of my class with a full scholarship and 3 job offers from major automotive companies. The future stretched ahead of me like an open highway, full of possibilities I could barely imagine. Then I met Sarah at a college coffee shop. She was studying to be a nurse, her laugh infectious, her dreams as big as mine. We married 6 months after graduation, both of us ready to conquer the world together. I took the job with Davidson Motors, their youngest design engineer, working on innovations that would revolutionize how cars were built. Life was perfect until it wasn't. Sarah's pregnancy with Camilla came with complications, severe morning sickness that lasted all 9 months, then postpartum depression that left her barely able to function. The medical bills started piling up. My entry-level engineer salary barely covered our basic needs, let alone the specialists Sarah required. When Camilla was 2, Sarah was diagnosed with lupus. The woman who used to dance around our tiny kitchen suddenly spent days in bed, her joints swollen, her energy completely drained. She needed constant care, expensive medications, and frequent hospital visits. I tried to balance everything. Work during the day, Sarah and Camilla at night. My engineering projects spread across our kitchen table after everyone was asleep. But something had to give, and Davidson Motors wasn't interested in engineers who couldn't put in 70-hour weeks. "We need team players here, Arthur," my supervisor had said when I requested more flexible hours. "If you can't commit fully, maybe this isn't the right fit." I lasted another 6 months before they let me go, citing performance issues that were really just me leaving at 5:30 to pick up Camilla from daycare and rushing to the pharmacy for Sarah's medications. The decision to open the small auto repair shop felt like giving up on everything I'd worked for, but Sarah needed stability, Camilla needed food and clothes, and I needed a way to support them that didn't depend on someone else's understanding. Henderson's Auto Repair started in a rented garage with tools bought on credit and prayers that customers would come. Those first years were brutal. 16-hour days became normal, my hands permanently stained with grease, my back aching from hunching over engines. The college friends who used to call about engineering projects slowly stopped reaching out. Sarah tried to help when she could, handling the books on her good days, but the lupus was relentless. Some mornings I'd find her crying at the kitchen table, frustrated by her own body's betrayal, guilty that I was carrying everything alone. "You gave up your dreams for us," she whispered one night after a particularly bad flare-up had sent us to the emergency room. "You and Camilla are my dreams," I told her, and I meant it. Even when my engineering textbooks gathered dust on the shelf, even when former classmates sent Christmas cards from their suburban homes talking about their promotions and business trips. When Sarah died of complications from lupus 6 years later, Camilla was only 8. I became everything to her: father, mother, taxi driver, homework helper, cheerleader at school events. The auto shop kept us afloat, but just barely. I remember the night Camilla came home from middle school crying because her friends were talking about their father's jobs. "Why can't you be a doctor or a lawyer like Madison's dad?" she asked through her tears. I sat on her bed, my work clothes exchanged for old jeans, and tried to explain that success wasn't just about what job you had. But how do you tell a 13-year-old that sometimes love requires sacrifice? That sometimes being a hero means getting your hands dirty? By high school, Camilla had learned to be vague about what I did for a living. "My dad works on cars" sounded better than "my dad is a mechanic." I pretended not to notice when she asked friends to drop her off a block away from the shop. College applications brought new challenges. Camilla wanted to go to prestigious schools, and I wanted that for her too. I took on more work, expanded the shop, hired 2 employees so I could take on fleet contracts with local businesses. Every extra dollar went into her college fund. "Dad, you don't have to work so hard," she'd said during her senior year, but her eyes were already fixed on the future, on getting away from our small town and the life that embarrassed her. I worked harder anyway, because that's what fathers do. Because Sarah would have wanted Camilla to have every opportunity. Because I loved my daughter more than I loved my own comfort. She graduated with a business degree, got a good job in marketing, met Marcus at a company conference. When she brought him home to meet me, I saw how his eyes took in the small house, the work clothes hanging by the door, the calloused hands I shook his perfectly manicured one with. "So you're in the automotive industry too," he said that first night, and I could hear the condescension in his voice. "Something like that," I replied, not wanting to embarrass Camilla by going into details about the difference between designing cars and fixing them. Now, standing in this ballroom that cost me 2 years of my life, watching my daughter avoid my eyes after her husband publicly humiliated me, I wondered if all those sacrifices had been worth it. But as I looked around the room, my gaze fell again on the man at table 12. He was still watching me with that same intense expression, and something about his focus made me think he understood more than anyone else in this room. I had no idea he was about to change everything. The man at table 12 rose slowly from his seat, and something about his movement made the entire room shift its attention. He wasn't tall or particularly imposing, but he carried himself with a quiet authority that commanded respect without demanding it. I watched as he made his way toward the front of the ballroom, weaving between tables with the confident stride of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere all at once. His simple dark suit looked expensive up close, I realized, the kind of understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted wealth. Marcus, still basking in the aftermath of his cruel toast, noticed the man approaching and extended his hand with that practiced political smile of his. "Enjoying the reception?" The man ignored the outstretched hand entirely, his eyes scanning the room before settling on the abandoned microphone. "Actually, I have something to say." There was something in his tone that made Marcus step back instinctively. The man picked up the microphone with the casual familiarity of someone accustomed to addressing large groups, though he looked more like a professor than a public speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried clearly through the sound system, calm but commanding. "My name is William Patterson. I apologize for interrupting your evening, but I feel compelled to share something important with you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I noticed several guests exchanging glances, whispering among themselves. The name seemed to mean something to some of them, though I couldn't place it myself. Marcus looked confused, his earlier confidence wavering. "I'm sorry, but who exactly are you? I don't remember you on the guest list." William's smile was thin, almost predatory. "I'm here as Arthur Henderson's guest, though I suspect he doesn't remember inviting me." My heart stopped. I had no memory of inviting this man, had never seen him before tonight. How did he even know about the wedding, and why was he claiming to be my guest? William continued, his gaze sweeping across the room with practiced ease. "You see, I've known Arthur for quite some time now, 15 years to be exact, though our relationship has been, let's call it discreet." The confusion in the room was palpable. Camilla was staring at me with wide eyes, clearly wondering who this mysterious man was and why I'd never mentioned him. Marcus looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "I've been watching tonight's festivities with great interest," William went on, his tone conversational but with an undercurrent of steel. "Particularly that charming toast from the groom about his new father-in-law." Marcus paled slightly, perhaps sensing that his moment of triumph was about to be challenged. "It's fascinating how people make assumptions," William mused, almost to himself. "How they look at a man in work clothes and think they know his entire story. How they see calloused hands and assume that's all there is to see." I felt my pulse quickening. Where was this going? What did this stranger know about me that I didn't know myself? William's eyes found mine across the room. "Arthur, you've been remarkably modest about your achievements. Perhaps too modest." The room had gone completely silent now. 300 guests hanging on every word. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, sensing that something significant was happening. "You see," William addressed the room again, "I'm what you might call a talent scout in the automotive industry. I look for innovations, for brilliant minds that might be overlooked by the traditional corporate structure." Marcus frowned, his confusion deepening. "What does this have to do with anything?" William's smile was sharp now, like a blade being unsheathed. 15 years ago, I was investigating reports of unusual modifications being made to fleet vehicles serviced by a small repair shop in this very town. The improvements were remarkable. Engines running cleaner, lasting longer, performing better than they had when they rolled off the assembly line. My hands started trembling. I remembered those modifications, the late nights spent in the shop experimenting with ideas that had been floating in my head since my engineering days. I'd never thought anyone noticed or cared. When I tracked down the source of these improvements, I found a former Davidson Motors engineer running a small auto repair shop, a man whose innovative solutions were being implemented quietly, without patents or publicity, simply because he wanted to do better work. The room was completely still now. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. William turned to face me directly. Arthur Henderson, former mechanical engineer, current genius-level innovator whose fuel injection modifications have been quietly revolutionizing the industry for over a decade. "That's impossible," Marcus sputtered. "He's just a mechanic. He fixes cars." William's laugh was cold. "He doesn't just fix cars, young man. He improves them, and those improvements, they caught the attention of some very important people in Detroit." I felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. Those late-night tinkering sessions, the small modifications I'd made to help customers get better performance from their vehicles, they were just the restless stirrings of an engineer's mind that refused to stay quiet. "In fact," William continued, his voice gaining momentum, "Arthur's innovations have been incorporated into 3 major automotive patents over the past decade, patents that have generated considerable revenue for the companies smart enough to license them." Marcus was shaking his head in disbelief. "You're making this up. If any of this were true, he wouldn't be living in that tiny house working with his hands." William's expression grew serious. "That, Mr. Richardson, shows exactly how little you understand about the man whose daughter you just married. Arthur Henderson could have lived very differently. But he chose to remain here, to keep working with his hands, to stay close to his roots and his daughter." The words hung in the air like smoke, and I felt something shift inside me. Memories were surfacing now. Phone calls I'd dismissed as sales pitches, legal documents I'd signed without fully understanding, checks that had seemed too good to be true. William wasn't finished. "Which brings me to why I'm here tonight. Arthur, I think it's time these good people learned the truth about exactly who they've been sharing dinner with." The anticipation in the room was suffocating. Marcus looked like he was about to be sick. Camilla was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read, and I realized that my life was about to change forever. William reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather portfolio that looked like it had seen years of important meetings. The simple gesture somehow made the entire ballroom feel smaller, more intimate, as if we were all about to witness something that would change everything. "Arthur," William said, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there when he was addressing Marcus. "Do you remember signing these documents?" He opened the portfolio and held up several official-looking papers. Even from across the room, I could see they bore my signature, though I couldn't recall the circumstances clearly. "The first one," William continued, "was for a fuel injection modification you developed that increases engine efficiency by 18% while reducing emissions by 23%. Ford licensed that technology for their entire truck line in 2019. My legs nearly gave out. I remembered that modification, the weeks I'd spent perfecting it on old Mrs. Patterson's pickup truck because she couldn't afford to keep buying gas. I'd made the adjustment for free, just to help her out. The paperwork William had brought me later seemed like routine patent protection. The second," William held up another document, "was for a transmission enhancement that virtually eliminates the need for major repairs before 200,000 miles. General Motors bought exclusive rights to that one." The room was spinning. Marcus had gone completely pale, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. Several guests were whispering frantically to each other, their expressions shifting from confusion to amazement. William smiled at me, and for the first time tonight, someone's smile felt genuine. "And the third, which we finalized just last month, involves a revolutionary approach to electric vehicle battery cooling that could extend battery life by 40%. "This is insane," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "If this were true, he'd be rich. He'd be famous. He wouldn't be working in some grimy garage." William's expression hardened as he turned back to Marcus. "Rich? Let me tell you about Rich, young man." He pulled out what looked like a financial statement and adjusted his reading glasses. "Arthur Henderson, as co-inventor and patent holder, has earned approximately $3 million in royalties over the past 15 years. The number hit the room like a thunderclap. I heard gasps, saw several people literally lean forward in their chairs. Camilla's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. But that's just the licensing fees, William continued, clearly enjoying the effect his words were having. As my business partner in Patterson Henderson Innovations, Arthur owns 40% of a company that's currently valued at $12 million. I gripped the back of the nearest chair to keep from falling. Business partner, company valuation. These were terms from a life I'd never imagined living. Marcus was shaking his head frantically. That's impossible. If he had that kind of money, why would he? Why would he work as a mechanic? Why would he live in that small house? William's smile was sharp as a knife edge. Because, unlike some people, Arthur Henderson understands that a man's worth isn't measured by his bank account or the size of his house. He chose to live modestly because he wanted to stay close to his daughter, to be the same man who raised her with love and sacrifice. The words cut through the elegant ballroom like a sword through silk. I could see the realization dawning on faces throughout the crowd. This wasn't just about money. This was about character. Arthur chose to work with his hands because he loves the work, William continued. He chose to live simply because he values relationships over possessions. He chose to pay for this wedding from his shop earnings rather than his royalty account because he wanted to show his daughter that her happiness was worth his sacrifice. Camilla was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she stared at me with what looked like horror and regret mixed together. For the first time tonight, she seemed to really see me. William turned to address Marcus directly. So when you called this man a greasy, smelly mechanic who scraped together money for this wedding, you weren't just insulting someone from a different social class. You were insulting a millionaire inventor who chose to hide his wealth rather than flaunt it. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. The blood had drained from his face completely, and he was gripping the edge of the head table with white knuckles. But here's the part that really interests me, William continued, his tone becoming almost conversational. Arthur never told anyone about his financial situation. Not his daughter, not his friends, not even his own family. Do you know why? The room waited in absolute silence. Because he wanted to be loved for who he was, not what he had. He wanted his daughter to be proud of him as a father, not impressed by him as a wealthy man. He wanted authentic relationships, not ones based on dollar signs. William's eyes found mine again. Arthur, you've been protecting everyone from the truth about your success because you were afraid it would change how they saw you. But after tonight, I think it's time they saw you clearly. I felt tears burning my eyes. All those years of hiding, of letting people look down on me, of watching my own daughter feel ashamed of what she thought was my failure, it had all been to protect this dream of genuine love, authentic connection. But the look on Marcus's face told me everything I needed to know about how genuine his feelings had ever been. William closed his portfolio with a crisp snap. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been dining tonight as guests of Arthur Henderson, millionaire inventor and one of the most innovative minds in the automotive industry, a man who chose to serve you from the heart rather than impress you with his wallet. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, someone at table 8 began to clap. Others joined in, until the entire room was applauding, but it felt different from the polite applause after Marcus's cruel toast. This felt like respect, like recognition, like people seeing me for the first time. Marcus stood frozen at the head table, his face ashen, his dreams of superiority crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. And for the first time in 30 years, I stood completely straight, my shoulders back, finally ready to face the consequences of the truth. The applause died down, leaving a heavy silence that felt like the calm before a storm. Marcus stood at the head table, his face cycling through emotions like a broken traffic light: confusion, disbelief, panic, and finally, desperate calculation. He cleared his throat and forced that political smile back onto his face, though it looked strained and artificial now. Well, this is quite a surprise, he said into the microphone, his voice shaking slightly. Arthur, I had no idea about your accomplishments. I looked at him steadily, saying nothing. After 30 years of swallowing my pride, of accepting disrespect to keep peace, I found I had no words of forgiveness ready. Marcus's smile faltered under my silence. I mean, if I had known about your business success, I would never have. He stopped, seeming to realize that finishing that sentence would only make things worse. You would never have what? William's voice cut through the awkwardness like a blade. Treated him with basic human respect? Shown gratitude to the man who paid for your wedding? The room watched this exchange with the fascination of spectators at a car accident. 300 guests who had come for champagne and dancing were now witnessing the complete dismantling of a man's character in real time. Marcus turned to me, his hands shaking as he set down the microphone. "Arthur, please. You have to understand, it was meant to be lighthearted, teasing between family." Family. I repeated the word slowly, tasting its bitter irony. "Is that what you call humiliating someone in front of 300 people? Camilla stood up from the head table, her wedding dress rustling as she moved toward me. Her makeup was streaked with tears, her perfectly styled hair disheveled from running her hands through it. She looked younger suddenly, vulnerable in a way that reminded me of the little girl who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares. "Daddy," she whispered, the childhood nickname she hadn't used in years slipping out. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never knew about any of this." I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised and sacrificed for, who had sat silent while her husband tore me down in public. "You didn't know about the patents or the royalties," I said quietly. "But you knew who I was. You knew I was your father who loved you, who worked every day to give you the best life I could, and you let him humiliate me anyway." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I was embarrassed," she admitted, her voice breaking. "All my friends' fathers are doctors and lawyers and businessmen. I was ashamed that mine was just a mechanic." "Just a mechanic," I repeated, feeling the weight of those words. "Your mother was a nurse, Camilla. Did that make her just a nurse? Do you think honest work is something to be ashamed of?" She was crying harder now, her expensive makeup running down her cheeks. "No, I don't know what I was thinking. Marcus always said." "Marcus always said what?" William interjected, his tone sharp with interest. Camilla glanced nervously at her new husband, who was trying to signal her to stop talking. "He said that successful people don't work with their hands, that if Dad had any real talent, he would have made something more of himself by now." The admission hung in the air like toxic smoke. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest, the last vestiges of paternal protection crumbling away. Marcus stepped forward, his desperation palpable now. "Arthur, please, you have to understand my position. I come from a certain background, with certain expectations. I was trying to fit in with my family's standards." "Your family's standards," I said slowly. "Tell me, Marcus, what do your family's standards say about a man who insults his wife's father at their wedding? About a man who takes money for an expensive celebration and then publicly humiliates the person who provided it?" Marcus's face went pale again. He looked around the room, perhaps hoping for support, but found only watchful faces and uncomfortable silence. William stepped closer to the head table, his presence somehow making the space feel smaller. "I'm curious about something, Marcus. What exactly do you do for a living?" Marcus straightened his shoulders, trying to reclaim some authority. "I'm in sales, medical equipment sales." "And how much do you make annually in medical equipment sales?" William's question was casual, but everyone in the room understood its significance. That's personal financial information," Marcus stammered. William smiled that predatory smile again. "Arthur made $847,000 last year between his shop earnings and his patent royalties. He spent $65,000 on this wedding. Would you like to tell everyone how much you contributed?" The silence was crushing. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again, looking like a fish gasping for air. Camilla turned to her husband with a look of dawning horror. "Marcus, how much did you contribute to our wedding?" "It's not about money," Marcus said weakly, but his voice had lost all conviction. "You're right," I said, standing up straighter. "It's not about money. It's about respect. It's about gratitude. It's about treating people with basic human dignity regardless of what you think their social status is." I walked toward the head table, my steps measured and deliberate. The crowd parted as I moved, 300 faces watching my approach with varying degrees of fascination and concern. "Marcus," I said when I reached him, my voice calm but carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, "you wanted everyone here to know that you think I'm beneath you, that marrying my daughter was somehow lowering your standards. Well, now everyone knows exactly who we both are." I turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for celebrating my daughter's wedding with us. The bar remains open, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening." Then I looked at Camilla, my heart breaking as I spoke the words I never thought I'd have to say. "Camilla, I love you. I always will. But I will not be disrespected in my own family. Not by your husband, and not by your silence. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A bank transfer form I'd prepared weeks ago, setting aside money for their honeymoon and first year of mortgage payments. $50,000 I'd planned to surprise them with after the reception. I tore the paper in half and let the pieces fall to the floor. When you're ready to have a real conversation about respect and family, you know where to find me. I walked toward the exit, leaving behind the whispers, the shocked faces, and the daughter who had chosen her husband's approval over her father's dignity. For the first time in 30 years, I was walking away from a fight instead of absorbing the blows, and it felt like freedom. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of a cabin in Montana, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. The coffee in my hands was better than anything I'd ever tasted, probably because for the first time in decades, I was drinking it without worrying about getting to work on time or paying someone else's bills. The silence here was different from the silence in my old house after Camilla moved out. That had been the silence of emptiness, of dreams deferred and love unrecognized. This was the silence of peace, of a man finally free to discover who he was when he wasn't trying to be everything to everyone else. My phone buzzed on the wooden railing beside me. A text from William. The Toyota people want to meet next week about the hybrid transmission project. Are you interested? I smiled, typing back, only if we can do it via video call. I'm not cutting this vacation short. Vacation. The word still felt foreign in my mouth. I'd worked every day for 30 years, through holidays and weekends and family emergencies. Now I was learning what it meant to wake up without a schedule, to eat lunch when I was hungry instead of when I could grab 5 minutes between customers. The money had always been there, accumulating in accounts I rarely checked, earning interest on investments William managed with my casual consent. But it wasn't the money that had changed everything. It was the permission to finally stop apologizing for who I was. Another buzz. This time it was a longer message from an unknown number. Dad, it's Camilla. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that Marcus and I are getting divorced. I finally understand what you were trying to tell me. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time, watching the steam rise from my coffee cup. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sad for the pain my daughter was undoubtedly going through, but mostly, I felt something I hadn't expected. Detachment. The desperate need to fix her problems, to rush in and make everything better, was gone. She was 38 years old, and she had made her choices, just as I was finally making mine. I typed back, I'm glad you're safe. I'm traveling right now, but we can talk when I get back. But Camilla, things will be different between us now. Her response came quickly. I know. I'm sorry, Dad, for everything. I set the phone aside and went back to watching the sunrise. Sorry was a good start, but it wasn't enough to rebuild what had been broken. That would take time and effort and a fundamental change in how we related to each other. Later that morning, I drove into the small mountain town to pick up supplies. The hardware store owner, a gruff man named Pete who knew nothing about patents or royalties, had become something of a friend over the past month. Morning, Arthur, he called out as I entered. How's that deck project coming along? Almost finished, I replied, selecting the wood stain I needed. Should be ready for those chairs I ordered. Good man. Nothing like building something with your own hands, is there? I smiled, thinking about how different this conversation was from the ones I'd had at Camilla's wedding. Here, nobody cared about my bank account or my patents. They cared about whether I showed up on time, whether I did good work, whether I treated people with respect. It was refreshing to be valued for character instead of accomplishments. The bell above the door chimed, and a woman about my age entered, shaking snow from her jacket. I'd seen her around town a few times, but we'd never spoken. Morning, Pete, she called out, then nodded politely at me. Excuse me, are you the fellow staying in the Jenkins cabin up on Ridge Road? That's me, I replied. Arthur Henderson. Susan Walsh? She introduced herself with a warm smile. I live just down the mountain from you. I wanted to invite you to our community potluck this Saturday if you're interested. We get together once a month, nothing fancy. I felt something lighten in my chest. I'd like that. What should I bring? Just yourself, she said. Unless you cook. Do you cook? I laughed, surprising myself with how genuine it sounded. I make a mean chili, learned out of necessity when my daughter was young. Perfect. 6 o'clock at the community center. After she left, Pete grinned at me. Susan's good people. Lost her husband a few years back. Moved up here for the quiet. You could do worse for company. I paid for my supplies, thinking about the invitation. When was the last time I'd been invited somewhere just for the pleasure of my company? When was the last time I'd been excited about meeting new people instead of worried about whether they'd judge me? That evening, I called William to catch up on business matters. Our partnership had evolved into something more like friendship over the past months, built on mutual respect rather than necessity. You sound different, he observed after we'd finished discussing the technical details of our latest project. Different how? Relaxed, like you're finally living in your own skin instead of trying to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be. He was right. For 30 years, I'd been trying to be the father Camilla needed, the provider my family required, the humble mechanic who didn't make waves. I'd been so busy being what everyone else needed that I'd forgotten to discover what I wanted. I got a message from Camilla today, I told him. How do you feel about that? I considered the question seriously. Sad for her. She's going through a divorce, dealing with the consequences of marrying someone who only valued her as an accessory. But I'm not rushing to rescue her anymore. That's growth, William said approvingly. What are you going to do? Talk to her when I'm ready. Set some boundaries. See if we can build something real instead of something based on guilt and obligation. 3 weeks later, I met Camilla at a diner halfway between her city and my mountain town. She looked older, more tired, but there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years, humility. You look good, Dad, she said as we slid into opposite sides of a booth. Happy. I am happy, I replied simply. She fiddled with her coffee cup, struggling to find words. Marcus left me for his secretary 2 months after the wedding. Turns out he'd been seeing her for over a year. I felt a flash of anger on her behalf, but it was distant, controlled. I'm sorry that happened to you. Are you? She asked, meeting my eyes directly. Because I would understand if you weren't, after how I treated you. Camilla, I love you. I always will. But I'm not going to pretend that your choices didn't hurt me, or that we can just go back to the way things were. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I know. I was horrible to you. I was so worried about what other people thought that I forgot to think about what was right. We talked for 2 hours. Really talked. Maybe for the first time since she was a child. I told her about the loneliness I'd felt, watching her grow ashamed of the life I'd built for us. She told me about the pressure she'd felt to live up to Marcus's expectations, to be someone worthy of his family's approval. I want to try again, she said as we prepared to leave, if you're willing, but I understand if you need time. I hugged her goodbye, and for the first time in years it felt genuine. We'll take it slow, I promised, and things will be different. 6 months after that conversation, Camilla came to visit me in Montana. She met Susan, who had indeed become good company, and the friends I'd made in the community. She saw me relaxed and confident in a way she'd never witnessed growing up. You seem like a different person, she observed on her last night as we sat on the deck watching the stars. I'm the same person I always was, I replied. I just finally stopped apologizing for it. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm proud of you, Dad, not because of the patents or the money, because you had the courage to walk away from people who didn't appreciate you, even when one of those people was me. Looking up at the vast Montana sky, I felt something I'd been missing for 30 years. Contentment. Not the desperate happiness that comes from other people's approval, but the deep satisfaction of a man at peace with his choices. I'd lost a daughter for a while, but I'd found myself, and in the end that made it possible to have both. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.